Omegas die quietly. That's what every wolf in Frostvale believed, what Alara had been taught since the day she first shifted and failed to meet their eyes. But on the night the blizzard turned the north into a killing field, when she dragged 23 frozen wolves across her threshold, she would discover that mercy was the rarest form of strength and the most dangerous weapon she'd ever wielded. The wind didn't howl, it screamed, a raw animal sound that clawed at the cabin walls like something starving. Alara braced her shoulder against the door, feeling the wood shudder under the blizzard's fury. Snow had already climbed past the window ledges, sealing her inside a tomb of white and timber. Frost crept across the inside of the glass in delicate, killing patterns, beautiful the way a blade catches light before it cuts. She should have been at the Longhouse. 3 nights ago, when the weather warnings turned from caution to evacuation, Alpha Cormac had summoned every wolf in Frostvale territory to shelter behind stone walls and steel drum fires. Safety in numbers, he'd said. Survival in the collective. But Alara wasn't part of the collective. Not in any way that counted. Omega. They'd called her that since her first shift, 12 years old, trembling, producing a wolf so small the pack beta had laughed until he choked. Born without the strength to hunt, without the dominance to lead, without even the mediocre competence that might make her useful for patrol or supply runs. Her wolf was a ghost of what it should have been. Her human form, unremarkable. Her presence in the pack, tolerated only because ancient law forbade outright abandonment. Barely tolerated. Don't bother coming to the Longhouse. Beta Ronin had said it 3 nights ago when she'd approached the gathering caravan, her arms full of the few belongings she could carry. His lip curled as he looked her up and down like she was something rotting. Dead weight freezes faster, and we don't have space for wolves who can't contribute. Generators are for pack members who earn their keep. His mate, Senna, with her perfect teeth and sharper cruelty, had laughed, a bright crystalline sound that sliced deeper than any growl. Honestly, Alara, you'd probably be warmer in your little shack anyway. Less body heat to dilute. Stay where you belong. Where she belonged. Alone. Always alone. So she'd return to her cabin, a glorified storage shed shoved to the edge of pack territory like an afterthought, and prepared to survive. She'd stacked firewood until her palms bled, chopped kindling until her shoulders screamed, boiled water and rationed canned vegetables into something that tasted like ash and called it soup. Her wolf whimpered low in her chest, a frightened thing that felt more like prey than predator. They weren't built for this. Not really. But they'd survived worse. The storm had been raging for 2 full days. Alara had burned through half her firewood, keeping the single room from freezing solid. She'd wrapped herself in every threadbare blanket she owned, layered socks until her boots barely fit, and still the cold gnawed at her bones. The cabin's walls had been built for summer storage, not winter habitation, and the wind found every gap, every crack, every failure in the wood. Better than nothing, the pack elders had said when they'd assigned it to her. Be grateful, they'd added, as if gratitude could insulate walls or conjure heat from empty air. Alara was trying to be grateful. She really was. She stirred the thin soup on her wood stove, mostly water, a few shriveled carrots, a handful of rice she'd been stretching for a week, and did the math in her head. If the storm lasted another 2 days, she'd run out of food. If it lasted 3, she'd run out of firewood. No one would check on her. No one would bring supplies. If she died out here, they'd find her body in the spring thaw and shrug. Omega couldn't handle the cold. Weak wolf. At least she didn't waste resources. Her hand trembled as she lifted the spoon to her lips. The broth was barely lukewarm, but it was heat, however small, from the inside out. Her mother had taught her that, back before the sickness hollowed her out and left Alara alone for good. You're stronger than they think, Starborn, her mother had whispered on her deathbed, her hand cold and frail in Alara's grip. Omega doesn't mean broken. It means you see what others overlook. You feel what they ignore. That's not weakness, baby. That's power they'll never understand. But power didn't keep you warm. Power didn't fill an empty belly. Power didn't stop the sneers or the turned backs or the loneliness that lived in your marrow like ice. Alara was setting down the bowl when she heard it. A sound beneath the storm.
Soft. Weak.
Desperate. Scratching. Her wolf surged to attention, ears pricked even though she was still human. Something was outside. Something alive. She froze, spoon halfway to the stove. She shouldn't open the door. Opening the door meant losing heat she couldn't replace. It meant letting the blizzard in, letting it smother her fire, bury her supplies, kill her as efficiently as any enemy. The storm was a living thing now, malevolent and patient, and it wanted inside. The scratching came again. Weaker. Frantic. Followed by a whimper, low, broken, achingly familiar. Alara's chest tightened.
She knew that sound.
She'd made that sound once, years ago, when the younger wolves had locked her out of the pack den during a winter prank and left her scratching at the door for 3 hours before someone heard. She remembered the cold seeping into her lungs, the certainty that she would die and no one would care enough to notice until morning. Her hand moved to the door latch before her mind caught up. "Don't be stupid," she told herself, voice harsh in the silence. "It's debris. A branch. The wind playing tricks." The scratching turned frantic, claws on wood, desperate, dying. Then the whimper again.
Pained. Small.
Wolf. Alara wrenched the door open. The blizzard exploded into her home like a living fist. Snow slammed into her face, blinding, choking. Wind tore at her cloak, her hair, her breath. The cold was so brutal it felt like fire, searing her skin, burning her lungs. But there, half buried in a snowdrift on her doorstep, lay a wolf. Not a werewolf in skin. A true wolf. Medium-sized, tawny and gray, its fur rimed with ice so thick it looked carved from stone. Its amber eyes cracked open for one heartbeat, met hers with an intelligence too sharp to be animal, and then slid shut. "No, no, no, no," Alara gasped, dropping to her knees. The snow soaked through her pants instantly, cold enough to ache. She grabbed the wolf under its front legs and pulled. Dead weight. Heavier than it looked. Her omega strength barely enough. Her shoulders screamed. Her boots skidded. But she dragged the wolf over the threshold, slammed the door against the wind, and stumbled backward, only to see more eyes gleaming in the storm beyond.
Dozens of them.
Glittering. Watching. Waiting. And as Alara's breath caught in her throat, the wolves began to move toward her light, one by one, like ghosts stepping out of a white hell. She didn't know it yet, but the Omega who'd been left to die alone had just opened her door to a king, and 22 wolves who would never let her be invisible again. Alara's breath came in short, sharp gasps as she stared into the storm. The eyes staring back were too many to count, a constellation of amber, gold, and silver scattered across the white abyss like dying stars. 1 wolf became 3. 3 became 6. 6 became a dozen. They emerged from the blizzard like ghosts given form, gray, tawny, black, white, staggering on frozen legs, collapsing mid-step, dragging themselves forward with the last dregs of strength creatures possess when survival becomes the only imperative. All of them moved toward her light. Her warmth. The only hope for miles in a landscape that wanted them dead. Alara's mind tried to refuse what her eyes were seeing. 20 wolves. Maybe more. Her cabin was barely large enough for her. She had 1 fire, half a woodpile, 3 days of food if she rationed carefully. The math was impossible. Letting them in meant losing everything: heat, supplies, space, safety. Letting them in meant dying alongside them. But refusing meant watching them die because of her. The first wolf, the tawny one she'd already dragged inside, whimpered behind her, a sound so broken it made her chest ache. Her hands were already moving before her mind made the decision. Inside, she shouted into the wind, her voice ripped thin and desperate. "Now move." She didn't know if they could understand her. Didn't know if they had the strength left to obey. But one by one they came. A massive gray wolf collapsed at her feet, tongue lolling, breath shallow and rattling. Alara grabbed him under the shoulders and pulled, her boots slipping on ice, her muscles screaming protest. Dead weight. Too heavy. But adrenaline flooded her system, the same primal strength that let mothers lift cars off their children, and she hauled him over the threshold. Another wolf stumbled through before she could close the door. Then two more. Then a cluster of smaller ones, moving together like a unit, supporting each other's weight with coordinated precision that felt disturbingly intentional. They weren't behaving like panicked animals. They were behaving like soldiers in retreat. Alara counted as they entered.
7, 10,
15. Her single-room cabin shrank with every body that collapsed onto her floor, against her walls, into the corners. Great heaps of frozen fur and labored breathing. Some were smaller, lean, and fast-built. Others were massive, paws the size of her hands, shoulders broader than seemed natural. 18.
20.
22. The last wolf to approach was the largest she'd ever seen. A black wolf, pure midnight with threads of silver through his fur like starlight woven into shadow. He moved differently than the others. Slower. Deliberate. Every step looked like it cost him. His head hung low, his breathing shallow, and when he reached the threshold, he didn't collapse so much as surrender, his massive body crumpling in her doorway like a fallen monument. Alara threw her full weight against the door, forcing it closed against the wind. The latch clicked. The howling storm became muffled. And suddenly her cabin was filled with a sound worse than the blizzard. 23 sets of lungs pulling desperate, rattling breaths. Some whimpered. Others lay silent, too cold to even shiver. Okay, Alara whispered, her voice shaking. Okay, think. Her fire was dying. The door had been open too long, and the cold had rushed in like a flood, stealing the heat she'd spent 2 days hoarding. She lunged for the stove, throwing wood onto the embers with shaking hands. The kindling caught. Flames licked upward, spreading warmth back into the space. But 23 wolves. How was she supposed to warm 23 wolves? Body heat. That was the only answer. Pile them together. Let them share warmth, share breath, share survival. Alara began moving them. She dragged the smaller wolves toward the fire, arranging them in a semicircle around the stove. She pushed the larger ones into clusters, layering them on top of each other like puzzle pieces, creating pockets of shared warmth. They were so cold most of them barely reacted. Some watched her with glazed, exhausted eyes. Others had their eyes closed entirely, chests rising and falling in uneven rhythms that terrified her. One small silver-gray female wasn't breathing right, short, gasping breaths that stuttered and caught. Alara knelt beside her, rubbing her chest gently, trying to warm her core. Come on, she whispered. Stay with me.
Breathe.
Just breathe. The wolf's eyes cracked open, pale blue, startlingly human in their clarity, and held Alara's gaze for one long moment before sliding shut again. But her breathing evened out. Steadied. Thank the gods. Alara worked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. She threw every blanket she owned over the pile of wolves. She heated snow in her dented pot and dribbled warm water into mouths when they opened, coaxing them to drink. Most were too weak to lap properly, but a few managed a few desperate swallows. The brown wolf she dragged in second had a blackened paw, frostbite, advanced and brutal. She wrapped it gently in a spare cloth, praying she wasn't making it worse. A lean tawny wolf with intelligent amber eyes watched her the entire time, tracking her movements with a focus that felt oddly protective. When she passed close, he shifted his body slightly, positioning himself between her and the door. Guarding. These aren't normal wolves, a voice whispered in the back of her mind. They move like a unit. They think like a pack with strategy. But Alara shoved the thought aside. She didn't have time for questions. She had 23 dying creatures in her home, and if she didn't act fast, they'd all be corpses by morning. The largest wolf, the black one, was the worst. He lay where he'd fallen, half in her doorway, too massive to move easily. His breathing was so shallow she had to press her hand to his chest to confirm his heart was still beating. The rhythm was slow. Too slow. His fur was frozen solid in places, ice crystals embedded so deep she couldn't brush them out. There were scars along his muzzle, old, faded. The marks of battles survived. This was not a wolf used to losing. "Stay with me," Alara whispered, rubbing his chest, his legs, trying to force circulation back into his limbs. "Come on, big guy. Don't you dare die in my house. I didn't drag you in here to watch you fade." His eyes cracked open. Gold. Pure molten gold, unlike anything she'd ever seen on a wolf. They were too bright, too aware, too ancient. They fixed on her face with an intensity that stole her breath, made her wolf sit up and take notice inside her chest, made every instinct she possessed scream that this was not just an animal. This was something more. "I see you," those eyes said without words. "I know what you're doing. I won't forget." Then they closed again, and he went still. Alara's hands trembled as she pulled back. What was that? Her heart hammered against her ribs. For a moment, she'd felt seen, truly seen, in a way she hadn't experienced since her mother died. It terrified her. It anchored her. She kept working. She fed the fire until her woodpile was reduced to a quarter of what she'd started with. She boiled more snow, filling every container she had with drinking water. She checked each wolf individually, paws, ears, tails, looking for frostbite, for injuries, for signs of hypothermia advancing beyond recovery. Several had blackened paw pads. 2 had frozen ear tips. 1 had a gash along his shoulder that needed cleaning. She did what she could with the sparse supplies she had: clean cloth, warm water, whispered reassurances. The silver-gray female's breathing evened out completely. The massive brown wolf began to shiver, which was actually a good sign. Alara remembered from her mother's teachings. Shivering meant the body was still fighting, still trying to warm itself, still alive. One by one, the wolves began to stabilize. But Alara's supplies vanished at an alarming rate. She'd used half her remaining firewood. She'd boiled through 2 pots of snow just to get them hydrated. Her food stores, already meager, would last maybe 2 days if she fed them. Less than 1 if she fed herself too. The choice wasn't even a choice. She pulled out her last can of stew, meant to be 3 meals for her, and heated it on the stove. She divided it into 23 tiny portions, dribbling warm broth into mouths, coaxing the stronger wolves to eat small bites of meat and vegetables. They needed it more than she did. They were barely clinging to life. She could go hungry. She'd done it before. "You're stronger than they think," her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "You see what others miss." What Alara saw now was simple. These wolves had been abandoned by the storm the same way she'd been abandoned by her pack. And she'd be damned if she became the kind of creature who closed the door on the dying just to save herself. By the time the fire burned low and the storm's fury began to ease into exhausted silence, every wolf in the cabin was breathing steadily. Some slept. Others watched her with eyes too aware, too grateful, too knowing. Dawn pressed pale gray light against the frosted windows, though calling it dawn felt generous. The world beyond the glass was still a wall of white, but the wind had stopped screaming. The blizzard had exhausted itself. Alara collapsed against the wall near the fire, her body shaking with exhaustion. She hadn't slept in over 30 hours. Her clothes were soaked with melted snow. Her hands were raw and aching. Her food was gone. Her firewood nearly spent. And she didn't care, because they were alive. All 23 of them. Breathing. Warming. Surviving. Weak. Worthless. Disposable. Alara had saved 23 lives. Her eyes drifted closed, just for a moment, just long enough to rest. A sound pulled them open again. The black wolf was moving. He rose to his feet in one smooth, fluid motion, no stiffness, no hesitation, moving with a predatory grace that shouldn't have been possible for something that had nearly died hours ago. And as he stood to his full height, Alara realized she'd underestimated his size. He was massive. His shoulder came up to her waist. His head would easily reach her chest. And every single wolf in the cabin reacted. Heads lifted, ears perked, bodies shifted into postures of submission, heads lowered, ears back, tails tucked. Even the brown wolf who'd positioned himself as her guard pressed his belly nearly to the floor. They weren't reacting to a packmate. They were reacting to a leader. Alara's breath caught. Oh no! The black wolf turned those impossible gold eyes on her. He stared for a long moment, assessing, calculating, understanding, his gaze traveling over her face, her hollow cheeks, her threadbare clothes, the empty pot on the stove, taking inventory of everything she'd sacrificed. Then he walked toward her. Every instinct Alara possessed screamed at her to submit, to lower her eyes, to show her belly, to acknowledge his dominance. But this was her cabin, her fire, her mercy that had saved him. So she held his gaze and stood her ground. The black wolf stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body, close enough that she could smell pine and snow and something wilder, something that made her wolf whimper with confused recognition. His eyes burned into hers. And then, impossibly, he bowed. A deliberate dip of his massive head. A gesture of acknowledgement, of respect, of something that felt dangerously close to devotion. Then he turned, positioned himself between her and the door, and settled into a guarding posture, claiming her protection as his responsibility. Alara's vision blurred with exhaustion. Her body gave out. She slid down the wall and let unconsciousness take her, surrounded by 23 wolves she'd saved, guarded by one whose gold eyes promised she would never be abandoned again. She had no idea she'd just rescued a king. She had no idea everything was about to change. Alara woke to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that pressed against her eardrums like a held breath, like the moment before lightning strikes. The kind of silence that made prey animals freeze and predators lift their heads. Every wolf in the cabin was awake. All 23 sets of eyes were open, ears pricked forward, bodies tense with an alertness that had nothing to do with the storm outside. They weren't watching the door. They weren't watching her. They were watching him. The black wolf stood in the center of the room, no longer collapsed, no longer dying. He rose with the fluid grace of something built for violence, every muscle coiled with restrained power. And as he moved, the very air seemed to shift around him, growing heavier, denser, charged with a presence that made Alara's wolf whimper and press flat inside her chest. Dominance. Pure, undiluted, overwhelming. The other wolves reacted instantly. The tawny guardian who'd positioned himself at her door lowered his head, ears flat, body language screaming submission. The silver-gray female pressed her belly to the floor. The massive brown wolf, easily twice Alara's size, actually trembled, his powerful frame shaking not from cold but from the sheer weight of authority rolling off the black wolf in waves. Alara's throat went dry. Oh gods! What did I let inside? This wasn't a stray wolf seeking shelter. This wasn't even a regular pack wolf. This was an alpha, a real one, the kind that commanded instant obedience through presence alone, whose dominance was so powerful it felt like gravity, pulling everything into its orbit. And she dragged him across her threshold like a sack of kindling. The black wolf turned those impossible gold eyes on her. The gaze was different now, not glazed with hypothermia, not weak with near death. It was sharp, assessing, intelligent in a way that made her skin prickle with awareness. He studied her face, her posture, the empty pot on the stove, the depleted woodpile, the careful way she'd arranged his packmates around the fire. Understanding everything. Then he walked toward her. Every instinct bred into Alara over 23 years of Omega conditioning screamed at her to submit, to lower her eyes, to show her throat, to prostrate herself before a predator who could kill her with one swipe of those massive paws. But exhaustion made her reckless. Hunger made her sharp. And damn it, this was her cabin, her fire, her mercy that had saved every single one of them. So when the black wolf stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the furnace heat of his body, close enough that his breath stirred her hair, Alara lifted her chin and held his stare. "You're awake," she said, proud that her voice only shook a little. "That's good. You were in bad shape last night." The wolf tilted his massive head, studying her with an expression that was far too human for an animal's face. His gold eyes held hers for one long, dangerous moment. And then he shifted. The transformation was instantaneous, a blur of fur and flesh, a ripple of impossible physics, and suddenly where a wolf had stood, there was a man kneeling on her cabin floor. Alara's breath punched out of her lungs. He was beautiful in a way that hurt. Tall, at least 6.5 feet of sculpted muscle and bronze skin. Broad-shouldered like a warrior, built for battle and dominance. His hair was black as midnight and wild, falling past his shoulders in waves that caught the firelight. And his eyes, those impossible gold eyes, were even more devastating in a human face, burning with an intensity that made her knees weak. But it wasn't his appearance that stole her breath. It was the power radiating off him like heat from a forge. This was dominance incarnated. This was an alpha in the truest, most primal sense. This was a king. Behind him, the other wolves began to shift too. One by one, naked men and women appeared where animals had been, warriors, soldiers, guards. All of them averting their eyes from the black-haired man. All of them radiating submission, even in human form. The tawny guardian became a lean, scarred man with amber eyes and a soldier's bearing. The silver-gray female shifted into a petite blonde woman with knowing eyes. The massive brown wolf transformed into a hulking warrior whose biceps were thicker than Alara's thighs. Werewolves. They were all werewolves. And Alara had just let 23 strange, powerful werewolves into her home. The black-haired man rose to his full height, towering over her. He took a step closer, and Alara's back hit the wall, trapped between timber and alpha, between her dying fire and a predator who could snap her neck with one hand. "Name," he said, his voice deep and rough, a command wrapped in silk. Alara's wolf screamed at her to answer, to obey, to give him anything he wanted. But fear and defiance warred in her chest, and defiance won by the thinnest margin. "Alara," she whispered. His gaze sharpened, the syllables clearly meaning something to him. "Alara of..." Her throat tried to close. "Frostvale Pack." Something flickered across his face, recognition, followed by something darker. "Frostvale," he repeated slowly, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Alpha Cormac's territory." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "And where is your pack, little Omega?" The question was casual. The tone was not. There was steel beneath the silk, threat beneath courtesy. "Why are you alone in this storm while your alpha shelters with his pack?" The lie rose automatically. Omegas protect the pack, even when the pack doesn't protect them, but Alara was so bone-tired of swallowing truth. So exhausted from years of making excuses for wolves who'd never once made excuses for her. "They didn't want me," she heard herself say. "Beta Ronin told me not to come to the Longhouse. Said I'd be dead weight. That generators were for wolves who contribute." The words tasted like ash. "So I stayed here." The silence that followed was suffocating. The black-haired man's expression didn't change, but his power did, tightening, darkening, coiling like a spring compressed to its breaking point. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop despite the fire. The other werewolves shifted nervously, feeling their leader's rage like a physical force pressing against their skin. "They left you to die," the man said softly. Too softly. It wasn't a question. "I'm used to it." The admission slipped out before Alara could stop it, and she hated how small her voice sounded. How defeated. The man's jaw clenched hard enough that she heard his teeth grind. His hands, large, calloused, capable of terrible violence, curled into fists at his sides. For a heartbeat, Alara thought he might put those fists through her wall. Instead, he took a careful breath and spoke with the deliberate control of someone holding fury on a very short leash. "How long have you been Omega, Alara of Frostvale?" "Since my first shift." The answer came automatically. 12 years. 12 years. Each word was precise, clipped. 12 years of this treatment. She nodded. The petite blonde woman, the silver-gray wolf, made a soft, pained sound. The hulking brown warrior looked like he wanted to put his fist through something. The amber-eyed guardian's expression had gone carefully blank, the way soldiers looked when they were trying not to show emotion. "Your Majesty," the blonde woman said quietly, her voice tight. "We should." "Your Majesty?" Alara interrupted, the title cutting through her shock. Her gaze snapped to the black-haired man. "You're what?" The man's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I haven't introduced myself properly. How rude of me." He took a step back, giving her space but somehow still dominating it. "My name is Damien Stormcrown, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, Lord of the Five Kingdoms, Commander of the Royal Guard." Alara's world tilted. Alpha King. The Alpha King. The most powerful werewolf in the known world. The ruler of territories that spanned thousands of miles. The wolf that other alphas bowed to, that packs whispered about in reverent tones, that legends were built around. She dragged the Alpha King across her threshold and made him drink watered-down broth from a dented pot. "Oh gods," Alara breathed, her knees buckling. She caught herself on the wall. "Oh gods, I'm so sorry. I didn't know, I never would have." "Never would have what?" Damien interrupted, his voice gone gentle in a way that was somehow more dangerous than his anger. "Saved my life. Saved the lives of my royal guard." He gestured to the 22 werewolves watching the exchange with expressions ranging from awe to fierce protectiveness. "Because that's what you did, Alara. You opened your door in a killer storm and pulled 23 dying wolves inside. You used your last supplies to keep us alive. You gave us your heat, your food, your shelter, everything you had, and asked for nothing in return. You needed help," Alara said simply, because what else was there to say? It was the truth. The only truth that mattered. Damien stared at her like she'd just said something profound. Like she'd revealed a secret about the nature of the universe. Then he did something that shocked her more than the shift, more than his identity, more than anything else that had happened in the last 12 hours. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face with one large, calloused hand. His palm was warm, gentle, reverent. "You saved a king, little Omega," he said quietly. "And by ancient law, that creates a life debt. Do you know what that means?" Alara shook her head, not trusting her voice. "It means you have the right to petition me for justice. For restitution. For anything you've been denied." His gold eyes burned into hers. "So I'm asking you formally, Alara of Frostvale, do you wish to bring charges against Alpha Cormac and your pack for abandonment and abuse?" Alara's heart slammed against her ribs. No, I can't. He'd kill you." Damien's voice went lethal.
No.
"He won't. Because you're under my protection now, and any wolf who touches you answers to me." "Your Majesty," the amber-eyed guardian said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss." Crack. The sound split the air like thunder. Everyone froze. Alara's gaze snapped to the ceiling. A thin line had appeared in the timber, dark, splintering, spreading like a crack in ice. Snow weight. Too much snow pressing down on a roof that had never been built to hold it. "The roof," the hulking warrior said grimly. "It's going to collapse." Another crack. Louder. The ceiling groaned, timber bowing inward under thousands of pounds of crushing white death. Damien's gaze locked on Alara's, and in that split second, she saw a decision made. Saw a king become a protector. Saw Gold Eyes promise something fierce and unbreakable. "Everyone out," he roared, his command voice brooking no argument.
Now.
And as the cabin ceiling began to fail, as her only shelter started to cave in around them, Damien Stormcrown stepped between Alara and death, and she realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the one she'd just unleashed. The cabin exploded into motion. Damien's command voice, that alpha roar that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct, cracked through the air like a whip. "Move. North wall, now." The Royal Guard responded like the trained unit they were. The hulking warrior grabbed Alara's threadbare blankets in one massive fist. The petite blonde snatched up what remained of the food supplies. The amber-eyed guardian lunged for the small wooden box on Alara's shelf, her mother's keepsake box, the only thing of value she owned, and tucked it into his arms like it was made of glass. But Alara stood frozen, staring up at the ceiling as it bowed inward with a sound like the world groaning. Snow pressed down with thousands of pounds of crushing weight. A second crack split the timber, wider this time, spiderwebbing across the rafters. Her home. Her only shelter. Everything she owned was in this cabin. Her mother's few belongings, the clothes she'd mended a dozen times, the sparse supplies she'd hoarded for months. 12 years of surviving alone, of making do, of carving out the smallest space to exist. About to be buried under snow and shattered wood. Alara. Damien's voice, closer now, urgent but somehow still gentle, cut through her shock. We need to go.
Now.
I can't, her voice cracked. This is all I have. Everything is. Strong hands gripped her waist, lifting her bodily off the floor.
Damien.
He had her pressed against his bare chest, one arm banded around her like steel, already moving toward the door even as another crack split the air above them. You have your life, he said roughly against her ear. The rest is just wood and stone. Move, damn it. The ceiling groaned again. That deep, dying beast sound that meant structural failure was seconds away, not minutes. The royal guard poured through the door like water, fast and coordinated. The amber-eyed guardian held the door frame, his massive body braced against it to keep it from slamming shut as wolves and warriors fled into the night. Damien hit the doorway at a dead run, Alara still clutched in his arms. The blizzard outside had died to a ghostly wind, but the cold was still brutal, slapping exposed skin, burning lungs, stealing breath. Alara buried her face against Damien's chest, her thin shirt no protection at all. His body heat was the only thing keeping her from freezing instantly. Behind them, the cabin collapsed. The sound was apocalyptic, timber snapping like bones, glass shattering, the entire structure folding inward under the weight of snow that had been building for 3 days. Alara felt the vibration through Damien's chest, heard the crash and roar of her whole life being erased in one brutal instant. Don't look back, Damien commanded, his voice rough against her temple. Eyes forward. We're not dying tonight. The trees. The petite blonde, someone had called her Sarah, shouted over the wind, pointing toward the dark line of forest barely visible through the snow. We need cover. They ran. 23 werewolves and 1 omega fleeing across a white wasteland that wanted them dead. Damien's arms were steel bands around Alara, his strides eating up ground so fast she couldn't have kept pace even if she'd been running herself. Behind them, she heard the coordinated footfalls of the guard, disciplined, protective, moving as one organism. They reached the tree line and plunged into relative shelter. The massive pines formed a natural barrier, their heavy branches laden with snow but creating pockets of space beneath, alcoves where the wind couldn't quite reach, where survival became possible instead of impossible. Here, the hulking warrior, Garrett, Alara's scattered mind supplied, pointed to a depression in the ground where several fallen trees had created a crude shelter, their trunks forming walls and their branches overhead providing a roof of sorts. Natural den. Best we'll find. The guard converged on the spot instantly, moving with practiced efficiency. Damien set Alara down carefully in the center of the hollow, immediately positioning himself between her and the worst of the wind. The others formed a circle around them both, creating a living windbreak with their bodies. Shift, Damien ordered. Fur's better insulation. We keep her at the center, layered formation. No one freezes tonight. Alara's exhausted mind struggled to process what was happening. The royal guard shifted back into wolves, massive, powerful creatures that moved with military precision. They created a ring around her, bodies pressed together, layering themselves like scales on a serpent. The smaller wolves tucked into gaps. The larger ones formed the outer barrier, taking the brunt of the cold. Damien shifted last, that blur of impossible transformation, and his massive black wolf pressed against Alara's back like a wall of heat and protection, his bulk blocking the wind entirely. Other wolves layered on top of them, creating a living den, a fortress of fur and breath and shared warmth. Alara should have panicked. She was pinned beneath predators, surrounded by teeth and claws, pressed so close she could feel every heartbeat, every breath.
Trapped.
Helpless. But she didn't feel terror. She felt safe. For the first time in 12 years, maybe in her entire life, she felt the bone-deep certainty that nothing would hurt her, that these wolves would die before they let harm reach her, that she wasn't alone anymore, wasn't disposable, wasn't forgotten. Pack warmth. Pack breath. Pack presence. The sensation was so overwhelming tears burned behind her eyes. Sleep, Alara. The voice echoed in her mind, not spoken aloud, but somehow transmitted directly into her thoughts. Damien's voice, warm and commanding, carrying an alpha's power that made her body relax against her will. You're safe. I promise you. Nothing will touch you while we breathe. Sleep. Her body obeyed before her mind could protest. Exhaustion pulled her under like a tide, and Alara fell into unconsciousness surrounded by wolves who'd chosen to protect her, not because they had to, but because she'd saved them first. She woke to silence. Not the tense, charged silence from before. This was the profound quiet that came after a storm exhausted itself, the kind of stillness that felt like the world holding its breath before daring to believe the danger had passed. The wolves around her were still sleeping, their breathing deep and even. Damien's massive form behind her radiated warmth like a furnace. She could feel his heartbeat against her spine, slow, steady, unbreakable. Carefully, Alara shifted enough to see beyond the den of bodies. Morning light, weak and gray, but unmistakably there, filtered through the pine branches. The blizzard had stopped. The wind had died. The world beyond their shelter was buried under what looked like 6 feet of fresh snow, pristine and deadly and impossibly beautiful. And in the distance, barely visible through the trees, was the place where her cabin had stood. It was gone.
Completely.
Just a mound of snow and broken timber, indistinguishable from the rest of the frozen landscape. 12 years of her life erased. The only home she'd ever known destroyed. Alara waited for the grief to hit, the devastating loss, the despair of having nothing left. But what she felt instead was something close to relief. That cabin had been a prison as much as a shelter. A reminder of her place in the hierarchy, of her disposability, of every day she'd been told she didn't matter. And now it was gone, and she was alive, and 23 wolves had risked everything to make sure she survived. Maybe mercy was its own kind of power after all. Behind her, Damien shifted, human again, his arm coming around her waist to pull her closer against his chest. His voice was rough with sleep when he spoke, his breath warm against her temple. You're awake. The storm stopped, Alara whispered, not wanting to wake the others. Hours ago. Damien's hand splayed across her stomach, protective and possessive in a way that should have frightened her, but somehow didn't. You slept through the worst of it. Your body needed rest. My cabin
is gone.
I know. His voice gentled. I'm sorry, Alara. I know what it meant to you. She was quiet for a long moment. It was all I had.
No.
Damien shifted, maneuvering them both until she was turned in his arms, facing him, trapped between his body and the den of sleeping wolves. His gold eyes burned into hers with an intensity that stole her breath. It was all they gave you. There's a difference. Alara's throat tightened. I don't understand. You saved my life last night, Damien said, his voice taking on a formal quality that made the sleeping wolves stir slightly, sensing the weight of what was coming. You saved the lives of 22 members of my royal guard. By the ancient laws that govern our kind, laws older than kingdoms, older than pacts, older than hierarchy itself, that creates a life debt. I don't want. Let me finish. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. A life debt means I owe you a boon. Anything within my power to grant. Wealth, land, title, protection, name it, and it's yours. But more than that, it means you have the right to petition me for justice. For restitution. For accountability from those who've wronged you. Alera's heart hammered against her ribs. Damien. Your pack abandoned you to die, Alera. They denied you shelter during a historic storm. They called you dead weight and left you in a cabin that wasn't fit for storage, let alone survival. Under pack law, under my law as Alpha King, that's not just cruelty. It's criminal negligence. It's grounds for removing an alpha from power. The words hung in the frozen air between them, heavy with implications that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. He'll kill me, Alera whispered. If I bring charges, if Cormac finds out I survived and told you what happened.
No.
The word was absolute, backed by the full weight of royal authority. He won't. Because as of this moment, you are under my protection. You are part of my guard's pack bond, temporary for now, but unbreakable while it holds. Any wolf who touches you, threatens you, or even looks at you wrong will answer to me personally. His smile was sharp, dangerous, utterly lethal. And I promise you, little Omega, they will not enjoy that conversation. Around them, the other wolves began to wake, shifting to human form, sitting up, watching the exchange with expressions that ranged from fierce agreement to something that looked almost like pride. Sarah, the petite blonde, spoke first, her voice soft but certain. Your pack now, Alera. We don't abandon our own. Garrett nodded, his massive frame somehow conveying both threat and protection. The king has spoken. You're under our watch. Our teeth. Our claws. The amber-eyed guardian, she still didn't know his name, held up her mother's wooden box, miraculously intact. We saved what we could. It's not much, but it's yours. Alera's vision blurred with tears she couldn't stop. These wolves, these powerful, deadly, royal wolves, were offering her something she'd stopped believing existed. Belonging. Protection.
Pack.
I don't understand why, she managed. Why you care. I'm nobody. I'm just. You're the Omega who opened her door in a killer storm, Damien interrupted fiercely. Who used her last supplies to save strangers. Who chose mercy over survival, compassion over fear. You're the wolf who saw the most powerful alpha in the north dying on her doorstep and dragged him inside anyway. His forehead pressed against hers, his voice dropping to something raw and honest. You're everything, Alera. You just don't know it yet. The storm had ended. The cabin was gone. The life she'd known was buried under 6 feet of snow and broken timber. And somehow, impossibly, Alera thought that might be exactly what she needed. A chance to become something new. The forward outpost was 40 miles north through terrain that would kill an unprepared wolf in hours. Damien explained this with the clinical precision of a military commander while his guard packed what little they'd salvaged from Alera's cabin. We move fast, he said, crouched beside the remains of their shelter as morning light turned the snow from gray to blinding white. Standard formation, scouts ahead, vulnerable in the center, rear guard watching our backs. We don't stop except for emergencies. How long? Sarah asked, already stretching in preparation. 6 hours if we maintain pace. 8 if we hit obstacles. Damien's gaze flicked to Alera, assessing. Maybe longer. The unspoken problem hung in the air like smoke. She can't keep up. Alera felt it in her bones, the weight of being the weak link, the burden, the reason 23 powerful wolves would have to slow down and risk exposure. Her Omega wolf was small, untrained for distance running, built for submission rather than endurance. She'd never run more than a few miles in her life. Garrett cleared his throat diplomatically. We could carry her. Rotation system. 2 wolves at a time, switching every hour to distribute the load.
No.
Alera's voice came out sharper than intended. I'm not. I won't be carried like cargo. You're not cargo, Sarah said gently. You're pack. We take care of our own. But I'll slow you down. Alera hated how small she sounded. How Omega. I'll put everyone at risk. Maybe I should just stay here until. Absolutely not. Damien's voice cut through her spiral with alpha authority that made her wolf snap to attention. You're not staying in the wilderness alone. That's not negotiable. The amber-eyed guardian. Alera had learned his name was Kale, frowned thoughtfully. What about a temporary pack bond? It would stabilize her shifting, give her access to borrowed strength for the journey. Silence fell over the group. Several wolves exchanged glances, some thoughtful, others uncertain. That's... Sarah hesitated. Your Majesty, that's a significant commitment. Pack bonds aren't meant to be temporary. Breaking them is. Painful. Damien finished, his expression unreadable. I'm aware. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. What's a pack bond? Damien turned to face her fully, his gold eyes serious. It's an alpha ability, rare, ancient, and not without cost. I can extend a thread of my power to you, temporarily linking your wolf to mine. It would strengthen you, stabilize your shifting, let you draw on royal pack energy to keep pace with us. That sounds... Alara searched for words. Too good to be true. What's the catch? Several catches. Damien's honesty was brutal and somehow comforting. First, it's intimate. You'll feel my emotions, anger, fear, joy, bleeding through the connection. I'll feel yours. There's no privacy in a pack bond. Alara's stomach flipped. What else? It's supposed to be permanent. Breaking it causes significant pain, emotional and physical, for both parties. Like severing a limb you've grown attached to. His jaw tightened. I can do it cleanly if necessary, but it won't be pleasant. And third, because she could tell there was more. Third, your wolf will recognize me as Pack Alpha. As your alpha. It's instinctive, biological. You won't be able to disobey a direct command while the bond holds.
His voice softened.
I won't abuse that. You have my word. But you need to know what you're agreeing to. Alara looked around at the 22 wolves watching her with varying expressions, concern, encouragement, protective fierceness. These wolves had saved her mother's keepsake box while fleeing a collapsing building. They'd formed a living shield around her in the forest. They'd called her pack like it was the simplest truth in the world. And now Damien was offering her strength, temporary, painful to sever, intimate beyond anything she'd ever experienced, so she wouldn't be left behind. You don't have to decide now, Damien said quietly. We can carry you if... I want the bond. The words came out steadier than she felt. If you're willing to offer it, I'm willing to accept. Something flashed in Damien's eyes. Relief, maybe, or something fiercer. You're sure? Once it's done, breaking it will hurt. I need you to understand that. I understand. Alara lifted her chin. I've been a burden my whole life. I've slowed down every pack I've ever been part of. Just once, I want to keep pace. To be strong enough that I'm not the weakness everyone has to compensate for. You're not weak, Sarah said fiercely. You saved a king and 22 guards with nothing but an Omega's mercy. That's strength most alphas will never possess. But I still can't run 40 miles. Alara's voice cracked slightly. And I'm tired of being the reason others suffer. If this bond can change that even temporarily, then I want it. I choose it. Damien held her gaze for a long moment, searching for doubt. Finding none, he nodded slowly. Then we'll do this properly. The old way, with witnesses and words that matter. Are you ready? Yes. Kale, Garrett, clear space. Sarah, you'll anchor the circle. Damien's command voice shifted into something older, ritualistic. Everyone else, bear witness. What we're doing is sacred, even if it's temporary. Treat it with respect. The royal guard moved with practiced efficiency, clearing snow to reveal frozen earth beneath. Garrett used a fallen branch to scratch a circle into the ground, roughly 10 feet across, marked with symbols Alara didn't recognize, but that made her wolf sit up and pay attention. The guards positioned themselves around the perimeter, forming a living boundary. Damien stepped into the center and extended his hand to Alara. Come. She took his hand. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. He drew her into the circle and positioned her facing him, their hands clasped between them. A pack bond is sacred, Damien began, his voice taking on a formal cadence that echoed in Alara's bones. It is trust made manifest, strength shared, protection offered and accepted. What I give you tonight is temporary by necessity, but no less true while it holds. He pressed her hands flat against his bare chest, directly over his heart. She could feel it beating, strong, steady, unbreakable. Damien Stormcrown, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, offer you my strength, my protection, my pack's power to call your own. I offer this freely, without obligation, without expectation of return. His gold eyes burned into hers. Do you accept, Elara of Frostvale? Alara's voice shook but held firm. I accept. Then speak the words. I accept your strength and offer my trust in return. She swallowed hard. I accept your strength and offer my trust in return. The world shifted. Power slammed into Alara like a breaking wave, raw, overwhelming, massive. It poured through her chest where her hands pressed against Damien's heart, flooding her veins with liquid fire. Her wolf, small, frightened, starved for so long, suddenly had access to something vast. Royal pack strength, generations deep, ancient and unbreakable. She gasped, knees buckling. Damien caught her, one arm banding around her waist to hold her upright. Breathe, he commanded, his voice rough. Let it in. Don't fight it. Your wolf knows what to do. Her wolf did know. It rose roaring inside her chest, no longer cowering, no longer small. It drank from Damien's power like a creature dying of thirst, growing larger, stronger, more real than it had ever been. The connection between them snapped into place with an almost audible click, a thread of light and heat and belonging that tied her soul to his. And through that connection, she felt him. Fierce protectiveness. Bone-deep satisfaction. Relief so profound it was almost painful. And underneath it all, something darker, more primal, a possessive certainty that whispered mine, mine, mine. Can you feel it? Damien asked quietly, his forehead pressed to hers now, their breath mingling in the frozen air. Yes. Alara's voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I feel everything. It's God's, it's so much. You'll adjust. The bond will settle. His thumb wiped away her tears with devastating gentleness. How does your wolf feel? Alara turned her attention inward and almost sobbed with relief. Her wolf was there, truly there, solid and strong and eager in a way it had never been before.
She's ready.
She wants to run. Then shift. Damien stepped back, giving her space. Show me what you've become. Alara had shifted before, hundreds of times, always producing the same small, unremarkable wolf that made pack members sneer. But this time felt different. This time, her wolf surged forward with confidence, with power, drawing on the bond to reshape itself into something new. The transformation rippled through her like lightning, fast, clean, right. And when she opened her eyes, the world had changed. Everything was sharper. Scents exploded in vivid detail, pine and snow, and the distinct musk of 23 wolves. Sounds carried for miles. And her body. Sarah gasped. Oh my gods. Alara looked down at herself and froze. Her wolf wasn't small anymore. She was beautiful, sleek and powerful, easily 2/3 the size of Damien's massive black wolf. And her fur was silver white, like moonlight on fresh snow, like starlight given form. Striking. Unforgettable. Reborn. Damien shifted in one fluid motion, his black wolf appearing beside her silver one. He was still larger, alpha-built, made for dominance, but Alara no longer looked like prey standing next to a predator. She looked like she belonged beside him. His gold eyes met hers, and through the bond, she felt his pride, his satisfaction, his fierce, possessive approval. Then he did something that stopped her heart. He walked around her in a slow circle, scent marking, claiming territory, and pressed his muzzle against her neck in a gesture wolves only made to their mates. Mine. His voice echoed in her mind through the bond, rough with emotion. My mate, if you'll have me, Alara. Not now. Not because of the bond. But someday, when you're ready, when you choose it freely, mine. The claim should have terrified her. Should have felt like ownership, like another alpha taking what he wanted. But it didn't. It felt like a promise. Like protection offered without expectation. Like someone finally seeing her as worthy of choice, worthy of wanting, worthy of forever. Alara didn't accept it. Not fully, not yet. She wasn't ready for mate and everything that word implied. But she didn't reject it either. Instead, she pressed her muzzle to his in answer, acknowledgement, maybe.
Possibility. Someday.
Through the bond, she felt Damien's satisfaction. His patience. His certainty that someday would come. All right, Garrett said loudly, breaking the moment with deliberate practicality. Bonding ritual complete, emotions are high, everyone's feelings are very intense. Can we please start moving before my ass freezes to this tree? Several wolves laughed. The tension broke. And when Damien turned north and began to run, Alara ran beside him. Keeping pace, keeping stride, keeping up for the first time in her life. The royal guard formed around them in practiced formation, scouts ahead, vulnerable in the center, rear guard watching their backs. But Alara wasn't vulnerable anymore. She was pack. She was bonded. She was silver white and strong and running through a frozen forest beside a king who'd called her mate. And 40 miles didn't feel impossible at all. The northern forward outpost rose from the frozen landscape like a fortress carved from stone and defiance. High walls, watchtowers, steel gates that gleamed dully in the late afternoon sun. Alara had never seen anything like it. Frostvale's territory had wooden palisades and gar huts. This was a military installation, built to withstand sieges and invasions. They'd been running for 7 hours with only brief stops to drink melted snow. Alara's new wolf body held up better than she'd dared hope, the pack bond feeding her strength when her muscles threatened to fail, Damien's power a constant steady pulse through the connection between them. But she was still exhausted, still half-frozen, still wearing nothing but the thin clothes she'd had on when her cabin collapsed. As they approached the gates, wolves appeared on the ramparts, soldiers in formation, weapons raised, arrows nocked and aimed at the approaching pack. Halt! The command boomed across the snow. Identify yourselves or be fired upon. Damien shifted mid-stride, the transformation so smooth it looked like water flowing uphill, and stood naked and utterly unbothered by 20 arrows pointed at his chest. His command voice carried across the distance with alpha authority that made even Alara's strengthened wolf want to drop and submit. I am Damien Stormcrown, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. Open the gates. Silence. A shocked, absolute silence. Then chaos erupted on the ramparts. Wolves scrambled, shouting orders. The soldier who challenged them appeared to be choking on his own tongue. And a voice, older, carrying the weight of command, roared from inside the compound. Your Majesty, open the gates.
Now.
Someone get Commander Thorn. The king is at our door. The massive steel gates began to grind open with the sound of machinery and muscle. Behind Alara, the royal guard shifted to human form, still naked, still unbothered, still radiating deadly competence. Sarah moved to Alara's side, positioning herself protectively. Stay close, she murmured. Outpost soldiers are loyal, but they're not used to seeing omegas in royal formation. You might get stares. Alara's stomach clenched. Stares she could handle. She'd been stared at her whole life. It was the contempt she dreaded, the sneers, the dismissal, the automatic assumption that omega meant worthless. The gates opened fully, and a wolf strode out, shifting mid-step into a grizzled man with silver-threaded hair and scars mapping a lifetime of battles. He wore the formal markings of high military rank. This was clearly Commander Thorn. He took one look at Damien and dropped to one knee in the snow, fist over heart. Your Majesty, we weren't expecting. We had no word of your arrival. If we'd known. You couldn't have known. We were caught in the blizzard 3 days north of here. Damien's voice gentled slightly. Rise, Commander. We need shelter, supplies, and communication with the capital immediately. Thorn rose, his gaze sweeping over the royal guard, counting, assessing, looking for injuries. When his eyes landed on Alara, his expression flickered with confusion. She was still in wolf form, silver-white fur making her stand out against the darker coats of the guards. And she was clearly Omega, smaller build, submissive posture ingrained from years of conditioning. An Omega, in royal formation, running with the king's personal guard. Thorn's confusion turned to sharp intelligence. Your Majesty, perhaps we should continue this conversation inside? Your companion looks half-frozen. She's not a companion. Damien's voice took on an edge that made several soldiers flinch. She's Pack. And she needs clothes, food, and a warm fire. See to it personally. Of course, Your Majesty. Immediately. Thorn gestured to the waiting soldiers. Bring blankets, clothing, and hot food to the command quarters. Someone wake the healer. Full medical examinations for everyone. And someone get a message to the capital. The king has returned. They poured through the gates into organized chaos. Soldiers scrambled to attention, snapping salutes as Damien passed. Others rushed to bring supplies, blankets, thick fur-lined cloaks, clothing sized for warriors that would hang loose on Alara's smaller frame. Sarah helped Alara shift back to human form, then wrapped her immediately in a massive cloak that smelled like pine and smoke and safety. Come on, let's get you warm before you collapse. The command quarters were overwhelmingly abundant. A roaring fire in a stone hearth. Tables laden with preserved meat, bread, dried fruit, and cheese. Spare clothing stacked in organized piles. Medical supplies. Weapons. Everything a military outpost needed to survive a winter siege. Alara stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the food. She'd spent 3 days rationing thin soup and stale bread. She'd given her last decent meal to the dying wolves in her cabin. She'd lived on the edge of starvation so long it felt normal. And now there was food. So much food. Just sitting there. Available.
Free.
Alara? Sarah's voice was gentle. You can eat. Take whatever you want. Alara's voice cracked. I don't know if I'm allowed. The words hung in the air like a confession. Several guards exchanged dark looks. Garrett's jaw clenched hard enough, she heard his teeth grind. You're allowed, Damien said quietly, appearing at her side. He'd wrapped a cloak around his waist, but remained otherwise bare-chested, unbothered by the cold or propriety. You're Pack. You're under my protection. Everything here is yours if you want it. Alara's hands shook as she reached for a piece of bread. It was soft, fresh somehow despite the outpost's isolation. She bit into it and nearly sobbed at the taste. Real grain, real substance, not the stale scraps frost veil through her when they remembered she existed. Easy, Sarah murmured, pressing a cup of warm broth into her other hand. Small bites. Your stomach isn't used to rich food. Alara couldn't help it. The tears came hot and fast, spilling down her cheeks as she ate. She was crying over bread, over abundance, over the simple fact that someone had said you're allowed and meant it. Damien's hand came to rest on her shoulder, grounding, warm, protective. Through the bond, she felt his rage, tightly controlled but burning like a forge. Not at her. Never at her. At the Pack that had reduced her to this. At the wolves who'd made her believe she wasn't worth feeding. Commander Thorn, Damien said, his voice carrying absolute authority. Gather your senior staff. I need witnesses for an official declaration. Thorn snapped to attention. Of course, Your Majesty. Should I? Now, Commander. Within minutes, a dozen high-ranking wolves filed into the command quarters. Officers, senior guards, the outpost healer. They arranged themselves in formal attention, sensing the gravity of whatever was about to happen. Damien waited until Alara had finished eating before he began. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of law and kingship. Let it be known and witnessed. Alara of Frostvale Pack saved my life and the lives of my royal guard during the historic northern blizzard. She opened her door in a killer storm, used her last resources to shelter 23 dying wolves, and asked for nothing in return. By ancient law, this creates a life debt. By my authority as Alpha King, she is now under permanent royal protection. Murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. Several looked shocked, others impressed. All of them were watching Alara with expressions that held respect instead of contempt. Furthermore, Damien continued, his voice hardening, I am formally charging Alpha Cormac of Frostvale Pack with criminal negligence and abandonment. During a declared emergency evacuation, he knowingly denied shelter to a pack member, leaving her to die in conditions that would kill even a strong wolf within days. This violates pack law, Omega protections, and basic decency. The room went absolutely silent. Thorne spoke carefully. Your Majesty, those are serious charges. Removing an alpha from power requires council approval and I'm aware of the process, Commander. That's why I need you to send 2 messages to the capital. Damien's gold eyes burned with purpose. First, inform the council that I've returned safely and will arrive within 3 days. Second, summon Alpha Cormac to stand trial for his crimes. Tell him if he doesn't appear voluntarily, I'll send my guard to drag him before the council in chains. Consider it done, Your Majesty. Thorne hesitated. Should I mention the Omega? The political implications of you bringing a... Her name is Alara. Damien interrupted coldly. And yes, mention her. Let the council know exactly why I'm bringing charges. Let them understand what kind of alpha abandons the vulnerable to save resources. Garrett cleared his throat. Your Majesty, with respect, the council factions will use this. Elder Voss and his allies have been looking for ammunition against you since the succession debates. They'll claim you're being manipulated, that an Omega is. Let them try. Damien's smile was sharp and dangerous. Let them argue that mercy is weakness, that protecting the vulnerable makes me unfit to rule. I'll enjoy dismantling those arguments in front of the entire assembly. Kale, the amber-eyed guardian, frowned thoughtfully. They might target Alara directly, try to discredit her testimony or worse. Which is why she doesn't leave our sight until the trial is over. Damien looked around at his guard, at the outpost officers, at every witness in the room. Anyone who threatens her answers to me. Anyone who insults her answers to me. Anyone who tries to use her to weaken my position will discover exactly why I've held the Northern Territories for 15 years without challenge. The threat hung in the air like drawn steel. Sarah spoke up, her voice practical. The council will want medical documentation, evidence, witness testimony. Then we give them everything. Damien gestured to the healer. Full examination. Document every sign of malnutrition, exposure, neglect. I want a report that leaves no room for doubt. The healer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, approached Alara carefully. May I? Alara nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The examination was thorough and humiliating in its revelations. Chronic malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, scars from old injuries that had healed poorly without proper care, signs of prolonged exposure to cold and overwork. Goddess above, the healer murmured, documenting everything with clinical precision. How long were you living like this? 12 years, Alara whispered. The healer's hands stilled. She looked up at Damien with barely controlled fury. Your Majesty, this isn't just negligence. This is systematic abuse. No Omega should, no wolf should live like this in a functional pack. Which is why Alpha Cormac will answer for it. Damien's voice was ice and iron. How long until you can have a full report ready? 2 hours, Your Majesty. Good. Commander Thorne, send your messages now. Tell the capital we're coming. Tell them justice is long overdue. Thorne saluted and strode from the room, barking orders to his communications officers. Damien turned to Alara, his expression softening slightly. You should rest. We leave for the capital at dawn. I don't. Alara struggled to find words. This is all happening so fast. Are you sure you want to do this? Challenging an alpha over an omega is not negotiable. Damien cupped her face with both hands, forcing her to meet his burning gold eyes. You saved my life. I won't let the wolves who tried to kill you walk free. This isn't charity, Alara. This is law. This is justice. And I promise you, by the time we're done, Every pack in the Northern Territories will know that Omega lives matter. Through the bond, Alara felt his absolute certainty, his rage at her treatment, his determination to burn Frostvale's negligence to the ground and salt the earth behind him. And for the first time in 12 years, Alara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, Mercy was about to become the most powerful force in the kingdom. Outside, in the communications tower, a raven took flight toward the capital carrying 2 messages that would shake the foundations of pack hierarchy. The king has returned. And he's bringing an Omega who saved his life to testify against the Alpha who left her to die. Court was coming, and Frostvale Pack had no idea what was about to hit them. They left the outpost at dawn with proper supplies, winter gear, and an escort of 12 outpost soldiers who insisted the king travel with adequate protection. Alara wore clothing that actually fit, thick wool pants, layered tunics, a fur-lined cloak that kept the worst of the cold at bay. Real boots instead of her worn-through ones. A pack with food that belonged to her. The journey to the capital would take 3 days at a sustainable pace. They traveled in wolf form during daylight, shifted human for evening camps. Military precision with rotating scouts and rear guards. Alara ran beside Damien, her silver-white wolf keeping stride with his massive black one, the pack bond humming between them like a living thing. It was through that bond, 2 days into their journey, that she felt his worry. Not the sharp spike of immediate danger. This was deeper, more complex. A knot of tension that sat in his chest like a stone, growing heavier the closer they got to the capital. "You're afraid," Alara sent through the mind link, the words traveling directly into his consciousness. The private channel still felt strange, intimate, and invasive all at once. Damien's black wolf huffed, annoyed at being read so easily. Not afraid. Concerned. About what? About what happens when we arrive. About the wolves who'll try to use you as a weapon against me. About whether I can protect you from politics as sharp as any blade. His mental voice carried nuances his spoken one rarely showed. Vulnerability, uncertainty, fear not for himself, but for her. Alara processed that as they ran. Why does this matter so much to you? I mean, yes, pack law says you have to care. But you could have left this alone. Declared the debt paid. Let Frostvale fade into the background. Why push for a trial? Damien was quiet for a long moment, his powerful strides eating up frozen ground. When he finally answered, the words felt pulled from somewhere deep and old. Because Omega abuse isn't an isolated problem. It's systematic. It's pack culture rotting from the inside. And if I, the most powerful alpha in the North, ignore it, then every other alpha will feel justified doing the same. He paused. Strong packs don't survive by sacrificing their vulnerable, Alara. They survive by protecting them. Any hierarchy that demands cruelty to maintain order is a hierarchy that deserves to collapse. The passion in his mental voice made Alara's chest tighten. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Maybe I am. She waited, sensing there was more. Sensing old pain beneath the words. My mother was Omega, Damien finally admitted. In a pack that treated her like dirt. My father was Beta, not Alpha, not powerful enough to fully protect her from the hierarchy's cruelty. I watched her endure years of abuse because no one with real power gave a damn. His mental voice went harsh. She died when I was 14. Officially, they called it sickness. Unofficially, she starved herself so my siblings and I could eat during a hard winter. Because Omegas always sacrifice. That's what packs expect from them. Alara's wolf whimpered softly through the bond. Damien. I swore when I took the throne that no Omega in my territories would die that way. That I'd rewrite pack law to protect the vulnerable instead of exploit them. But laws only matter if they're enforced. If I let Cormac walk for what he did to you, every reform I've fought for becomes meaningless. His gold eyes found hers as they ran. So this isn't charity, Alara. This is personal. This is the fight I've been waging since I was old enough to understand that power should protect, not destroy. Alara's throat tightened with emotion too complex to name. She'd thought she was alone in this. thought no one with power cared what happened to Omegas in forgotten corners of Pack territory. But Damien had been fighting this battle his entire reign, and she'd become his ammunition. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling me, for caring." "Thank you," he returned fiercely, "for surviving, for choosing mercy over bitterness, for being strong enough to stand as a witness when most wolves would have stayed silent out of fear." Before Alara could respond, Sarah's sharp bark cut through the companionable silence. "Alert! Danger!
Ahead."
Every wolf in the formation snapped to combat readiness instantly. Kale and Garrett, scouting ahead, came tearing back through the trees, shifting mid-run to human form. "Ambush," Kale barked. 20 wolves, maybe more. Professional hunters by their formation. They're blocking the mountain pass. Only route to the capital from here. Damien shifted immediately, his command voice cutting through the rising tension. "How long until we reach them?" 5 minutes at current pace. They know we're coming. They're positioned and waiting. Hired swords. Damien's expression went cold. Or council faction? Garrett's jaw tightened. The lead wolf wore Frostvale territory markings. The air seemed to freeze. Every guard bristled with barely contained rage. Cormac had sent assassins. Wolves willing to murder their own king's witness to silence her testimony before it could reach the capital. "They're here for me," Alara said quietly, her human voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. "Cormac knows I'm with you. Knows I'm going to testify. If I disappear, the charges lose their foundation. They're not getting within 100 yards of you," Damien snarled, power rolling off him in waves. Formation Delta. Protect the vulnerable, eliminate threats efficiently. Non-lethal if possible, but prioritize Alara's safety above all else. "Wait." Alara's voice cut through the tactical planning. "I'm not helpless anymore. The bond made me stronger. Let me fight." Sarah looked torn between pride and protectiveness. "Alara, you've had the bond for 2 days. These are trained assassins who think I'm weak Omega prey." Alara lifted her chin, that old defiance burning bright. "Let them underestimate me. Let me prove I'm not the weakness they need to eliminate." Damien studied her for a long moment, gold eyes assessing strength, resolve, capability. Through the bond, she felt his conflict, the instinct to protect warring with respect for her agency. "You stay in formation," he finally said. "You don't engage unless you have to. But if someone gets through our line..." His smile turned sharp. "Show them what happens when you piss off a wolf who survived 12 years of abandonment." They approached the ambush site as a coordinated unit, Damien at the front, Alara in the protected center, guards forming a mobile barrier around her. The mountain pass narrowed ahead, steep walls on either side creating a natural choke point. And waiting in that choke point were 23 wolves.
Lean.
Battle-scarred. Professional killers wearing Frostvale's territorial markings like badges of authority. The lead wolf, a massive gray male with cold amber eyes, shifted to human form and sneered at Damien with the kind of arrogance only suicide or stupidity produces. "Alpha King," the man said mockingly. "I'm afraid you'll have to leave the Omega here. Alpha Cormac requests her presence. Pack business. I'm sure you understand." Damien's laugh was cold enough to frost glass. Pack business. How fascinating. He took a step forward, power radiating off him like heat from a sun. "And does pack business typically involve ambushing your king with hired thugs? Because that's starting to sound a lot like treason." The gray male's sneer faltered slightly. "We're here for the Omega."
Not you.
"Hand her over, and we'll let you pass peacefully." "Let me pass." Damien's voice dropped to something lethal. Bold assumption. Wrong answer. The battle happened fast. The Frostvale assassins lunged, coordinated, professional, aiming to break through the guard and reach Alara. But they'd miscalculated. The Royal Guard weren't just any wolves. They were the elite, trained, bonded lethal. Garrett took down 2 assassins with brutal efficiency. Sarah moved like water, redirecting attacks and disabling threats without killing. Kale fought with precision that bordered on art, every strike deliberate, every movement calculated. And in the chaos, 3 wolves broke through the line. They came at Alara low and fast, expecting easy prey, expecting an Omega who'd freeze or flee. Instead, Alara shifted mid-dodge, her silver-white wolf moving with speed the pack bond made possible, and fought. She wasn't strong enough to overpower them, wasn't skilled enough to match their training. But she was fast, desperate, and drew on something they didn't expect. 12 years of surviving wolves who wanted her dead gave her instincts no training could replicate. She ducked under the first attacker's lunge, used his momentum to throw him off balance, bit the second wolf's leg hard enough to make him yelp and stumble. The third came at her from behind, and Garrett slammed into him like a battering ram, ending the threat with one brutal takedown. But Alara had held them long enough for backup to arrive, had used her new strength and pack coordination to prove she wasn't the weakness they'd expected. The fight ended as quickly as it began. 17 assassins subdued or fled. 6 dead, casualties of stupid decisions and professional incompetence. The gray male leader lay pinned beneath Damien's massive black paw, throat exposed, completely dominated. Till Alpha Cormac, Damien's human voice emerged from his wolf form, an alpha ability that made the effect even more terrifying, that if he sends assassins after my witness again, I'll stop sending bodies back. Are we clear? The gray male nodded frantically, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from realizing you just tried to kill a god's chosen. Damien released him, and the surviving Frostvale wolves scattered into the trees like smoke. In the aftermath, as the Royal Guard regrouped and treated minor injuries, Damien approached Alara. She'd shifted back to human form, breathing hard, hands shaking with adrenaline crash. "You fought," he said quietly. "I survived." Alara lifted her chin despite the trembling. "Isn't that what I do best?" Through the bond, she felt his pride, his fierce approval, and beneath it, something darker, mate instinct screaming that she'd been threatened, that she'd been in danger, that he should have protected her better. But he pulled back, gave her space, respected that she'd wanted to fight. That night, they made camp in a sheltered valley. As the others tended to equipment and posted watches, Damien found Alara sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. He sat beside her, not touching, but close. "You were magnificent today." I was terrified. Bravery and fear aren't opposites. They're partners.
His voice softened.
"Thank you for not being the damsel who needed rescuing. For being the warrior who fought beside us." Alara's throat tightened. The mate bond. I felt it spike during the fight. "You wanted to tear apart anything that threatened you?" "Yes." Damien's honesty was brutal. Mate instinct doesn't care about your agency or independence. It just wants you safe. But I'm not my instincts. I'm a king who believes wolves get to choose their own paths. He turned to face her fully. "So, I'm telling you now, if the bond becomes a cage instead of protection, tell me. If I overstep, tell me. You get to choose what kind of mate I become if you choose me at all." Alara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "And if I'm not ready to choose? If mate still feels too big, too fast? Then we stay bonded as pack, as allies, as whatever you need." His smile was gentle. "I can wait, Alara. I've waited 15 years to find someone who sees strength the way I do. I can wait longer." Before she could respond, Sarah called from the ridge. "Your Majesty, the capital." They climbed to higher ground and looked north. There, maybe 20 miles distant, the capital sprawled across the valley, lights glittering like fallen stars, buildings rising in stone and ambition, and over it all, the crushing weight of concentrated alpha dominance that made Alara's knees buckle. Dozens of alphas, maybe hundreds, all in one place. The power pressed against her skin like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Damien's arm came around her waist instantly, and through the bond, he shielded, his power rising like a wall between her and the overwhelming alpha density, filtering it down to something manageable. "I've got you," he murmured against her temple. "I'll hold this until your wolf adjusts. You're safe." Alara leaned into his strength and stared at the capital that held her future, trial, justice, and wolves who'd decide whether an Omega's testimony was worth believing. Court was waiting, and nothing would ever be the same. The capital gates opened to chaos. Word of the king's return had spread through the city like wildfire, and crowds lined the main thoroughfare, wolves pressing close to catch a glimpse of their returned sovereign, children perched on shoulders, merchants abandoning stalls to witness history. The royal guard moved through the throng in tight formation, Damien at the center, Alara at his side. But it wasn't Damien they were staring at. It was her. Is that an Omega? In royal formation. She's wearing guard colors. I heard she saved the king's life. Impossible. Omegas can't. The whispers followed them like smoke, curious and cutting in equal measure. Alara kept her chin up, kept her stride steady, kept her eyes forward like Damien had taught her. Through the pack bond, she felt his steady presence, an anchor keeping her grounded against the weight of thousands of judging eyes. They climbed the hill toward the council keep, a massive stone fortress that housed the governing body of the Northern Territories. Ancient banners hung from battlements. Guards in ceremonial armor lined the steps. And waiting at the entrance stood 12 wolves whose combined dominance hit like a physical blow. The Council of Alphas. The most powerful wolves in the kingdom aside from Damien himself. Alara's wolf whimpered and pressed flat inside her chest. Too many alphas. Too much dominance. Submit, submit, submit. Damien's power surged through the bond, shielding her. Breathe. I've got you. They can't touch you while I stand here. The council members were a study in contrasts. Some looked genuinely pleased to see Damien, stepping forward with warm greetings and relief evident on their faces. Others held back, expressions cool and calculating, clearly running political equations in their heads. One wolf stepped forward from the latter group, ancient, silver-haired, with eyes like chips of ice and dominance that felt like winter itself. Elder Voss, leader of the conservative faction and Damien's most vocal opponent on matters of pack reform. Your Majesty, Voss said, his voice carrying false warmth. We rejoice at your safe return. The report said you were lost in the historic blizzard. We feared the worst.